Good afternoon and good morning. My name is Derek Washam. I'm the Director of International Relations at the American Institute of Architects, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the third topic of the 2021 Global Architecture Exchange Series, Affordable Housing: What can architects do to address social inequalities? The Global Architecture Exchanges were developed last year and are a partnership between the American Institute of Architects, the Australian Institute of Architects, the Architectural Society of China, the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects, the Council of Architecture and Urbanism in Brazil, the Japan Institute of Architects, the Korean Institute of Architects, the New Zealand Institute of Architects, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, and the Royal Institute of British Architects. I'm delighted to be the host of this collaboration with our sister institutes, where we have the pleasure to have a great lineup of international speakers from 4 different countries in Europe, North and South America. It is fantastic that once again we have an audience from many different countries from around the world. It is great that we're able to reach so many of you wherever you are. In this third topic, we will hear perspectives from our experts from across the globe who are innovating architectural ideas to respond to social inequalities. Today's excellent lineup are award-winning experts in their field. They will talk about their experiences and the challenges they face in their parts of the world when thinking about different ways to deliver housing that responds to social inequalities. May I take this time to thank all of our speakers, whom I will introduce individually as we go through their main presentations. Professor Renato da Gama Rosa Costa from the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Brazil, Simon Ha of Steinberg Hart in the USA, Jerry Cahill of CMQ Architecture and Sketch Architects in Ireland, and Lanre Bolade of Bolade Design Studio in the UK. Thanks to each of you for taking time out of your busy schedules for this event. It is greatly appreciated. Before we move to the sharing session, there are a couple of housekeeping points for our audience. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. If you wish to ask your questions, please type these into the questions box. We will get to as many questions as possible. However, if yours was not answered, a record will be kept and you will be contacted with an answer wherever possible. For any queries, please do not hesitate to contact the team at RIBA at ribainternational@riba.org. I am now delighted to open the sharing session. Each of our speakers has around 6 minutes to share their thoughts. Our first speaker is Simon Ha of Steinberg Hart in Los Angeles. As the leader of Steinberg Hart's urban mixed-use practice, Simon plays a key role in the success of many of the firm's largest and most complex projects. To find compelling design solutions, Simon first analyzes the physical, environmental, social, and political context unique to each project. With nearly 20 years of experience in urban housing and mixed-use design, Simon is comfortable approaching projects with the mindset of a developer while creating spaces that enhance the user's life. He establishes collaborative relationships with clients to make a positive impact on communities, cities, and urban environments. Simon earned a Master's of Design Studies from Harvard University. Simon is also an engaged community leader in downtown LA. He serves as the chairman of the Skid Row Housing Trust Board of Directors and a member of the Planning Land Use Committee for Downtown LA Neighborhood Council. He is active on various boards and committees, including Central City Association, Downtown Center Business Improvement District, City of LA's Zoning Advisory Committee, and General Plan Housing Element Task Force, as well as AIA's Housing and Community Development Knowledge Community, which he chaired in 2017. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Derek. That was a mouthful. It makes it sound like I'm really busy these days. Thank you for that. So today, I know we have a very short time to go through the presentation. I wanted to focus on unaffordability that we're facing in Los Angeles and in California and in few of the key cities in the US. Just to give you a quick reference, my parents bought their house in 1996 for about $250,000. Today, that house is worth about $1 million. So in a stretch of about 20 years, we went from a very affordable city and became a very expensive city and is titled as one of the most unaffordable cities to live in Los Angeles when you compare household income to housing cost. We have seen a rapid rise in homelessness and poverty. So in the US, we have approximately 41 million people living in poverty, and you wouldn't really think of that for a developed country, but we have a lot of inequities that we're facing. So with the housing costs going up, the land prices, construction costs, and overall cost of living going up, as architects, we get involved in creating housing products that are more innovative, more affordable. So we're always looking for ways that we can help the situation. So I'm going to go over 5 projects today that we're working on, from very traditional affordable housing all the way to the newest innovations or the trends that we're seeing in the US, especially in Southern California. We'll start with a project here. This is an affordable housing project. And in the US, traditionally, affordable housing projects have been produced by tax credits, and it's a very long process to develop. This project was a city RFP, request for proposals. City was giving the land for $1, and they invited developers, nonprofits and for-profits, to develop 91 units of housing. One of the key factors that you will see here is affordable housing is extremely expensive to build, especially in California. So these housing here are costing almost about $700,000 per unit. And that has been a big topic of discussion to reform how we produce affordable housing. So many of the things that we'll see is, with a rise in homelessness, now we have PSH, which is permanent supportive housing, which is provide permanent housing for the homeless with supportive services included so that you can keep people housed. This is a model that we're testing as a modular because it's faster and cheaper and it's a better quality. This project, we were able to get the construction cost down by about 30% than a traditional construction for the same unit type, which cost about, in LA, about $500,000 to develop per unit. And these are just studios. And these are typically about 350 square feet or 35 square meters. And so these are not luxury units, but it costs a lot of money. So we're always looking for ways to innovate and lower the cost. This project is 149 units of permanent supportive housing. So we would house chronically homeless people in the housing, match them with subsidies so that rent can be supplemented. And on the lower 2 floors is where you have supportive services, etc. The next is a similar concept, but using mixed income. And California, it takes a long time to produce housing, typically 6 to 7 years from the time you start designing to the time that it's actually on the market. And for this project, we use a streamlined process called SB 35 that was created by the city to push housing. In California, we need about 3.5 million housing units to just deal with the pent-up demand. So this is a project where if you are building 30% of your overall as affordable and you're near transit, then you don't have to build any parking. So this is a mixed income model that we're testing out in Hollywood and near transit and near all the amenities, trying to see if we can create a viable housing delivery model using the mixed income as a mixed income building with zero parking. And you know, if you know Los Angeles, there's even a song, Nobody Walks in LA, and everybody drives a car, but we're trying to change that with transit and walkable communities. The next project is a micro housing. We started to see these a lot in Seattle, Northeast, and other areas. The housing units are typically about 30 square meters, 30 to 35 square meters. It's highly amenitized. I call these the Mini Cooper of apartments. And we have 5 projects where we're doing zero parking in high transit areas, rich amenity areas like Hollywood and downtown LA. The idea for this is for people who can't afford to live in a comparable apartment in the neighborhood. This provides a place for people to be able to afford and stay in the city and not be priced out and move out to surrounding areas and have to commute in. These are compact units. I think around the world, we're used to seeing more compact units. In the US, you know, our typical apartment size is 2-3 times this. So this for us in the US is a relatively new concept, coupled with no parking. The next one, another one in Hollywood, this is a tower that is using the co-living model. So co-living was a model that people were using to get away from parking requirements early on. So it was a way to game the system for the zoning regulations that required a lot of parking by putting 5 bedrooms in one apartment and individually leasing those suites. But this is becoming more popular because here in Hollywood, to be able to live in a studio, you're looking at $3,500, $4,000 in a high-rise, highly amenitized building. This would allow you to live in the same neighborhood, same amenity, in a hotel suite, basically, with a shared kitchen for about half the price that you can get the next tier housing. And you know, this isn't for lower income. This is more for people who are professionals who choose to live in the neighborhood, be able to work at Netflix and go, you know, walk to work, but still have the highly amenitized high-rise amenities. So this is more of a lifestyle choice. So that's the end of my presentation. This is a very quick kind of overview of the different innovations that we're seeing in terms of, you know, how do we produce products or how do we produce housing that are more attainable in key areas of the city where it has become so unaffordable. So thank you. And I look forward to discussing this further in the Q&A.
Thank you, Simon. We're now going to take a quick hop over the Atlantic to our next speaker, Jerry Cahill of CMQ Architecture and Sketch Architects Ireland. Jerry is a director of CMQ Architecture and Sketch Architects. He was a recipient of the Lord Mayor's Award in 2000 for his contribution to Dublin and his pioneering work in urban renewal and in the design of social and cooperative housing. As part of urban projects, he was awarded the RIAI Silver Medal for housing for Clarion Quay in Dublin's Docklands. He taught at UCD School of Architecture from 1978 to 2017. Jerry, the floor is yours.
Hello everybody. Hello everyone from Dublin. My name is Sandra O'Connell. I'm Director of Architecture and Communications here at the RAI, and I'm here with Jerry Cahill. And before I hand over to Jerry, I just wanted to give a little bit of the Irish context in terms of affordable housing and housing. We've had a housing crisis in Ireland for a number of decades now, and we've had a number of plans, and the most recent one published by the Irish government is called Housing for All, and it was only published earlier this month on the 2nd of September. It recognises that there are simply not enough houses to house everybody here in Ireland, and that homelessness is a big issue. And it's a very proactive plan. It is committed to providing over 300,000 new homes by 2030, meaning an annual average of at least 33,000 homes per year to come from both the public and private sector. And this will mean an annual average investment of in excess of 4 billion in housing in Ireland. Now, these are huge figures and huge sums of money, and as the Institute, we broadly welcome this plan, but we are also saying that quality of housing has to be at the forefront. Having adequate architectural expertise and resources in local authorities throughout Ireland and in government departments to deliver this plan, because Ireland is also currently struggling with a severe shortage of professional staff. And also we need to ensure that small practices are not excluded from the procurement system, and that our government invests in digital systems to make sure that all systems are streamlined. In the RAI, we continuously advocate for quality housing through our publications, research and policies. We run award schemes and medals to promote housing exemplars, and we partner with government in joint housing conferences and exhibitions. Jerry Cahill, who's speaking today here on affordable housing, is an advocate for sustainable communities and has participated in many of these events and also won a housing medal before. Jerry is presenting today a historic scheme, but one that we believe is highly relevant for solving today's problems and issues. It shows how local authorities can demonstrate leadership rather than leaving it to the private sector. It's a great story, and I hope you will find it as inspiring as I do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to tell a story about a suburban location for housing that was part of development of the west of the capital city of Dublin, and dealt really with the building of large areas of suburban housing and semi-detached housing, and also apartment buildings such as these. And over the years, this one particularly began to suffer a lot from lack of adequate accommodation and from decay of the fabric over time, and also inadequacy in terms of thermal performance, and also in relation to area. Sorry, if I could say next slide so that I don't run out of words. This gives some idea of what this was like in 1995, where the general area was suffering from a malaise up to antisocial behaviour, lack of defined open space, lack of defined private space, and also then balconies that were not sufficient for people's use. We made a drawing of the area which looked at how the central open space would work with connections across to other parts of the community, and how infill would work as well in relation to new housing, bookending existing terraces, and how existing blocks would be actually transformed as well into a variety of housing from what was on the site previously. Next slide. So this gives you an indication of the blocks which are slowly being abandoned. In the background is a scheme that the National Association of Building Cooperatives did, which converted one of the blocks into better quality housing. That gave hope, I think, to the neighbourhood to actually say, well, these other blocks, which were again beginning slowly to be detenanted and suffering excessive amounts of vandalism and antisocial behaviour, how they might be able to be looked at in relation to their refurbishment, their reuse, their repurposing, and how the open space related to each one could also begin to actually be better defined. Next slide, please. So we developed this as a kit of parts, in other words, taking each block and then thinking about how you'd put a new roof on, a crinkly tin roof, how you'd have roofs and stairs, how you'd begin to have elements such as porches and balconies and ways of wrapping up the existing buildings in an insulating coat. And then also between the blocks to begin to think about how you'd infill on different housing types. So the kind of blocks themselves, in this instance, sometimes they were bookended on the existing 3-story buildings, and sometimes they were actually infilled between them. But the kind of sense of being able to hang on to the existing fabric of the neighbourhood and not demolish it, not get into putting it into landfill, but reuse the structure that we had there and begin to think about how you could ameliorate it. Next slide, please. That gives you kind of a sense of where the existing blocks, the 3-story ones, were converted into ground floor single bedroom units and then duplexes over, a bit like the model that's used in traditional housing in parts of Dublin and throughout Ireland, where you have a walk up to a 2-story dwelling which sits over a 1-story, 1-bedroom dwelling, and between then houses. That's a typical Irish day, good weather, and the external insulation actually repaired all the facades, and so we're able to incorporate that with balcony space and then define the space in front of the building, the spaces between the buildings as well, so that there was a clarity between threshold, between what was public, what was semi-public, what was private and semi-private. So there was a layering going on in the area, that blocks that were standing in isolation were now part of a new edge. Next slide, please. We wanted to always use kind of a sense of traditional materials as well. So we used brickwork render, insulating render, increased the thermal value of the walls, which I'll show you later. And also then we used a composite roof material as well, which gave a very high level of insulation and then spaces. And then this gives you a kind of sense of the central open space, which was ill-defined before. Now gradually the blocks have been refurbished, converted, reused, and a new edge made. And on the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side of the slide, you'll see that's where the school is. And in the interim, since these slides were made, other communal facilities have been constructed in the parkland. Yeah, so that gives you a kind of sense of how it was a form of urban dentistry, as distinct from a form of urban surgery, a kind of sense of filling in the gaps in the teeth of the community, in building terms, of course. And yeah, next slide, please. And the kind of sense of what the isolation was of the living dwellings in the parkland before, and then afterwards the creation of a terraced edge to a newly defined open space. Next slide, please. Again, taking what we had of the existing structure from the point of view of the fact of the amount of embedded carbon in these buildings, when you think that what we were trying to actually achieve was to keep the existing structure as far as possible, reclad it, put new roof on, put new ground floors in, and improve the U values. So the scheme went from this of having a series of point blocks to a series of buildings that were forming part of an edge. And the numbers are interesting. If you can hold the slide for 1 second, and you can see that we started off with 1-bedroom units and then ended up with a variety of dwellings that were responding to need in the neighbourhood. In other words, they came from the housing waiting list of the local authority and responded to what people needed. And so the kind of sense of trying to make an affordable rental community that could provide a kind of sense of identity for people and eliminate that notion of kind of suburban and urban isolation. Next slide, please. And I think it's essential as part of any of what happens in relation to housing that it's not done as just single dwellings or groups of dwellings without amenity. This little community building, which has since been extended, formed a courtyard around which, next slide please, around which there was classrooms and a kind of cafe, so that the elderly people, or the older people I should say, could actually be there in the morning time, and there was creches as well, and so there was a kind of sense of interaction between generations, of the possibility of the older folk being able to look after their grandkids or whatever, and bring me sunshine, keep in colour in these buildings to actually act as a beacon in at times when the dark skies might actually predominate. Next slide, please. And finally, just a couple of slides showing other work that we did, which is to do with dealing with derelict sites, infilling for cooperative, the first one in Kilcrone in South County Dublin, infilling for cooperative and social housing, the Sophia housing down at the bottom of that slide, which was a convent, and just go back one, please. It was reused and created a communal garden in the city, and it converted the convent, created new housing for family units and for to create affordability right in the middle of the city, and provided what was called a wisdom centre, which is a little beacon of hope in that neighbourhood, which provides holistic education. Next slide. And then also the reuse of shops that are redundant now because of changing retail patterns, converting shops into walk-up and ground floor own-door access to one-bedroom dwellings, and then dealing also on the bottom one, the cooperative housing at New Street, where the site, which was created by the construction of an inner urban motorway, the site was reused to create a social cooperative housing scheme around a communal garden, which over time provided coal laundry facilities and playgrounds, and has become a really successful little community in that part of Dublin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Next, we have Lanray Bolade of Bolade Design Studio. As a client and architect, Lanray brings a unique perspective to the affordable housing development industry in the UK. With extensive knowledge in architectural design, engineering, and construction design management, and a passion for leading design teams using collaborative working methodologies, he leads the in-house multidisciplinary production innovation team for L&Q, one of the UK's largest affordable housing providers. His role focuses on transforming affordable housing delivery through adoption and integration of sustainable DFMA, MMC, and offsite methods. He is also co-founding director of Bolade Design Studio, where he oversees strategic practice management activities. The practice is focused on achieving high regenerative performance on all its projects, and particularly stresses importance on human socio-economic factors, as well as the ecological and environmental qualities of places and buildings components. Lanray currently sits on the RIBA's Practice and Profession Committee and has also been appointed to the Women's Economic Imperative as a sustainable communities and environment expert, providing development and delivery expertise on local community-based project opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa. Lanray, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Derek. And pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I'm going to provide a bit of a whistle-stop tour of, I guess, the UK context, and hopefully that will give you some ideas as to the innovative work happening in the UK. So, as Derek kindly advised, I do sit on both sides of the table, and I think that helps. Next slide, please. And I think that does help to provide some element of experiences and playing a bit of a collaborative bridge in terms of trying to create conditions that best deliver quality, affordable housing, and also looking to, I guess, ensure that bodies and industry forums collaborate better to achieve those objectives. I think the slide needs to move on to the slide, please, Richard. Thank you. So that's just a quick overview, but I think you've already heard the synopsis, so I'll move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, the UK context, 20 seconds is probably not enough to explain the extent of the challenge that we have in the UK housing market. But the headlines is really around delivering 300,000 homes as being a major kind of target set by the government. Over the last, well, I guess we've not necessarily been delivering those kind of volumes since the 1970s, where local authorities were contributing to a significant amount of housing alongside the private sector. In the last 50 years or so, that contribution has significantly decreased, with housing associations having to step into that alongside the private market to try and deliver the much needed housing, but we are still some way shy of the 300,000 homes required. In terms of the context and defining affordable housing, whilst there's no commonly agreed definition of affordable housing, the National Policy Planning Framework defines a housing that is required for sale or rent for those whose needs are not being met by the market, That includes housing that is subsidised through schemes like Help to Buy and shared ownership, but also is essential, is housing that's required for essential workers such as social workers, nurses, doctors, and other professionals. So in terms of funding for affordable housing in the UK, MACLG has recently committed a large sum of around £8.8 billion towards housing delivery. And that has been split between Homes England and the Greater London Authority, and hopefully will support around delivering 120,000 homes between 2021 and 2026, which is the next kind of investment cycle. So in terms of some of the challenges that we see in the UK, increasing kind of land values make development viability pretty challenging, which obviously inhibits the volume of housing that can come forward. So the construction industry is also being challenged by an aging workforce. It's still heavily reliant on traditional construction methods, and obviously we have the challenges of the planning system being still quite slow in terms of inertia, and that obviously will result in higher house prices and rents as well, making it difficult for those who need them to get access. So we get an increase in wealth divide in terms of haves and have-nots when it comes to housing. Fuel poverty is an increasing problem, especially with rising fuel prices, and ultimately, compounded with poor quality of accommodation that hasn't been retrofitted for generations, you often end up with issues around mental health, physical health and well-being, and obviously people living in crowded conditions. So we need to really kind of think about how do we address some of these social inequalities, and hopefully now I'll kind of run through a few opportunities and initiatives that are happening in the UK that may exist. So first ingredient would be very much focusing on, as architects, we should definitely seek to promote significant uplift in sustainability standards, as well as building performance. So the UN goals are obviously a key focus, but also looking at measures like Passive House and also the RRB 2030 Climate Challenge as a good start in achieving the UK's 2050 net zero carbon targets. Second is really around looking at tackling the issues of loneliness, mental health, and general social isolation. I think architects really have to place an importance on designing great places for people to develop increasing community spirit. So this project here by Peter Barber Architects at Homewood Studios is a compact series of houses for the homeless on a site that also accommodates facilities for training and counselling. These respectful cottages are arranged around future allotment, which you've just seen there, that will hopefully support residents in developing independence and confidence going forward. Another example is the Sterling Prize winning Goldsmith Street of 105 passive house schemes in Norwich, and this site has been co-designed by its residents and creates a shared community space and place safe areas for children to also inhabit. The next thing is really looking at developing superior performance and increasing the performance of buildings in terms of operational demands, and also things like thermal comfort and performance. So here you can see homes that we developed to passive house standards achieving 22.5 degrees over the course of the winter period, which is a stable temperature all year round. We also need to design for fuel poverty eradication, and through passive house and increased operational performance of buildings, we can reduce energy bills from space heating and hot water from £560 a year to something nearer towards £160 a year, and using measures such as fabric first approaches and passive house standard windows can cut out 70% of heat losses compared to double glazing, and also fabric first approaches can help to reduce heat losses by up to 90% as well. Okay, so in terms of additional ingredients, we've got government and local authorities supporting innovation in housing and looking at housing that can be better delivered through innovative means. So a lot of competitions have been released in the last few years, which seem to try to push architects and developers to think about how they can develop better housing. So the Homes 2030 Design Competition looked at that in terms of the ability for homes to adapt as residents age, encourage healthy living, but also delivering housing in sustainable methods and where potentially residents can develop themselves as well. We need more sustainable minded local authorities and clients to inspire greater housing and work collaboratively with architects to be able to deliver that. And we do have a number of councils within the UK who are really pushing the boundaries and have been for some time. This scheme here in Cambridge, Cordia, won the RIBA Sterling Prize in 2008, I believe, and has matured beautifully in that time. And that sets an example as to what we should be trying to achieve going forward. One other ingredient is very much around designing with co-residents and really kind of listening to what residents have to say about what it is that their spaces and communities need. And it's in this day and age with digital technology that can be a lot more equitable, making sure that all people of all ages and accessibility have access to having their voices heard and creating their environments. One of the successful examples of this is the Marmalade Lane co-housing scheme by Mall Architects in Town, the developer, and they have worked really well with their community to develop a wonderful community of 42 homes with a high degree of customization and a really vibrant community that's developing in that area. And finally, I think that architects should be developers as well to really kind of push and innovate and take some element of control over just how much affordable housing that one can seek to deliver. And we have examples in the UK whereby some architects have really kind of taken the bull by the horns and become developers themselves. One really innovative example that I see that I like is the Naked House community builders with OMX architects and delivering a part-finished affordable housing solution which enables residents to acquire a relatively bare asset in terms of a home and develop that and finish it with time as they have more money in their back pockets, which I think is a really fantastic initiative. And such ideas should come forward to assist in delivering nearer towards these 300,000 homes that we much need per annum in the UK. So I hope that's been insightful and inspiring. I'm handing back over to yourself, Derek.
Thank you, Lan Ray. Before we move to our next speaker, I just want to take a moment to remind folks that if you have questions, you can enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll be collecting those to ask our speakers after we finish with our last presentation. Up next will be Crossing the Atlantic once again for Professor Renato da Gama Rosa Costa of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, Brazil. Renato da Gama Rosa Costa is an architect and urbanist who graduated at Fluminense Federal University, has a master's in architecture and obtained a doctorate in urbanism from Rio de Janeiro Federal University. Renato studied at the Urbanism Institute of Paris and has a postdoctorate at Coimbra University Social Studies Center. He is an invited teacher of architecture and urbanism at Rio de Janeiro Pontificia Catholic University, a researcher and professor at Master Course in Historical Heritage, and at the National Health School at Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, the head of Casa de Oswaldo Cruz's Heritage Department, and Docomomo Brazil National Coordinator. Renato, you can start your presentation now.
Thank you very much, Derek. Thank you for reading the CV. It's a little complicated for non-English. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation. I'm here representing the Brazilian National Council of Architects and its president, Ms. Nadia Somek. It's an honor for me to be here at his round table, attending such important initiative. I work at Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, as Derek said, the Brazilian institution responsible for producing AstraZeneca COVID vaccine in our country. I'm an architect researcher dedicated at the last years to study the relation between urban and health. This presentation wants to bring some highlights in our habitation problems with a lack of habitability and health. Can we start, please? First, major historical inequalities in Brazil result in 25 million. Can you come back the first slide, please? I'm sorry. major historical inequalities in Brazil result in 25 million unhealthy homes. Yes, please, the next one. These are Brazil is a very big country, and the problems are not the same at all its regions, as we can see in this map. The next, please. This map can give a false image of the housing problems, thinking that we don't suffer from the housing quantity. The big problem is the quality of these homes. Next one, please. 6% of inadequate housing are headed by women in Brazil. Next one. Wow, I think there is a problem with the presentation. Well, 85% of the houses that we have in Brazil are not made by architects. It is made without the work of architects. That's the big problem. You may know that Brazil is one of the worst country dealing with the COVID, and we have a lot of deaths by COVID, as we can see in this map. Next, please. People in low-income neighborhoods have three times more risk of dying from an infection. We have some terrible problems with our poor housing, so that the COVID is worse for the poor people. Architects have been advocating for better urban and housing conditions since 1945. Through their representative organizations. Yes, next one. Slide. In 1945, the first Brazilian Congress of Architects, organized by the Institute of Architects of Brazil, debated the social role of architecture. In 1963, IAB promotes in Petrópolis the Quintanilha Congress with housing and urban as a central themes. 1970s, years later, Lina Bobard, Italian architect that moved to Brazil, proposed to General Figueiredo that the government hire architects to build popular houses. It's an idea, said the dictator. It's not an idea, Mr. President. It's a duty, replied Lina. 1988, it occurred the promulgation of Brazilian Federal Constitution, which listed the social function of private property as a principal means to achieving social justice. 2008, a law proposed by a deputy ensure low-income families free technical assistance for social housing. 2010, with the creation of our council that I'm representing here today, the idea of implementing technical assistance for social housing becomes a mission. CAL Brazil and regional councils decide to allocate 2% of the net revenue to sponsor ethics actions. 2 years later, through an open letter to candidates in the 2018 presidential elections that elected our President Bolsonaro, CAL Brazil and IAB proposed the incorporation of ethics as state public policy. 2020, architects open letter to candidates in the 2020 municipal elections suggests the creation of municipal funds for housing programs of social interests. CAL Brazil, created in 2010, has the mission of improving the life of Brazilian citizens by ensuring their right to live in healthy, safe, and sustainable homes and neighborhoods. The program More Architects is a strategic commitment CAU Brazil has undertaken this year. It aims to strengthen and promote architecture and urban planning as public health tools to ensure all citizens' right to well-being. 3 steps are needed: impulsion, with popular digital influencers and posts in our social media, will direct viewers to a thematic website with extensive content. Exposition, several live webinars and publications about health and architecture, with example of well-succeeded actions. Launching of an interactive map of social architects and projects. Dissemination, public commitment during UIA 2021 Rio that happened in July, last July, spread by many and diverse partners, architectural organizations, health actors, public managers, etc. Here are some examples of the CAU campaign for the Brazilian housing problems. We should say that architects must be recognized as health professionals. Population health is the human dimension of sustainability. Here are my colleagues at CAU Brazil. I would like to thank the invitation once more, and I finished here my presentation. Thank you very much. Sorry for any trouble.
Thank you, Renato. Thank you, Simon, Jerry, Lenry, for your fascinating insights. We are very keen to start stimulating some discussion on this topic. So I'm now going to open the event up to the floor for questions. So again, a reminder, if you haven't submitted a question and you would like to, feel free to enter it into the chat box on the side. For our first question, I'd like to ask the group, what can or should National Institutes of Architects do to help influence the delivery of good social housing for all?
I can start that discussion. I think, we discuss a lot. As architects, we are trusted advisors to our policymakers, and we have the ability to see things that general public cannot see because we are always envisioning, and we can predict the unintended consequences and outcomes many times. So I think we need to be active, and we call it citizen architect, being a citizen architect, and pushing for the policies that are going to produce housing and equity. So, I always tell my staff or people that I'm working with, if you're doing a great job on your project, you're impacting one project. If you are able to influence a policy that makes things better for the overall, you're impacting greater change. So I think as architects, we're in a unique position to be either making the policy or advising the people that are making policy.
Thanks, Simon. Would anybody else like to jump in here?
I think there's an enormous amount of energy out there among the architectural profession, and particularly among young architects. And I think that there's a huge amount of great innovation going on, and yet there isn't the kind of vehicle to actually liberate that innovation in relation to how people are procured, how work is procured, and I think there should be a way in which, like the project I showed you, where there's whole communities throughout this country who have got vast areas of underused and disused and land and buildings. And I think the opportunity is for architects to be able to envisage a different alternative future for those buildings and for the towns they sit and towns and communities they sit in. And I think that's an opportunity that should be given by just the elimination of a lot of the bureaucracy that's attached to actually commissioning projects.
I think I can also add to that, Derek, in terms of just building on what Jerry said, and really looking at how, I guess, as architects and institutes like the RIBA, we can better influence clients to be more ambitious in their delivery of affordable housing and social housing, and really looking at sustainability from a socio-economic as well as environmental viewpoint, to kind of provide more holistic development solutions that actually alleviate a lot of the challenges and problems that we see with social inequality in society. I think the importance of housing should never be underestimated in terms of growing up and living and being in good spaces and good homes can have generational impacts, which have obviously impacts on countries and economies for many years. So I think the importance should not be underestimated, and architects and the likes of the RIBA should be influencing the biggest clients and all clients to raise their level of sustainability holistically, looking at the impacts that has from an economic as well as social perspective as well. So I think that the influence of clients is a really big part in delivering better quality housing.
Yes, Derek. I think my presentation tried to say this. The whole of the architects in social politics and social duties. Our council is trying to interfere in the way that the poor people makes their own houses, introducing some kind of education and some kind of training to help them to build more better houses and in more better spaces. It is very difficult for us because we depend a lot of public and federal investment. And at this time, we are not having such a successful task in this problem. But our council is very, as it is written in the presentation, it's a mission to our council to get more better housings for the poor people.
Thank you, Renato. Next, we have a question from the audience. It has been mentioned many times that the problem is often the quality of the housing.
Mm-hmm.
In what ways can we approach this problem and find solutions for better living conditions with limited budgets, and also by not sacrificing the quantities because of the quality? How can we find this balance?
I don't think we can, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, shall I? I don't think we can avoid building with quality. I mean, that's building properly. In my own experience, I've seen so much building failures over the last number of years, particularly around the times of economic boom, where things were not built properly. And once you don't build properly, then what begins to happen over time is that the cost and use of the buildings that are there begins to escalate, and it becomes uneconomical to use them or to heat them or to just live in them. So I don't think it shouldn't be an either or. You know, the fact of the matter is we are obliged to build properly and sustainably with proper energy issues taken into account. And I don't think that's something that can be avoided.
Absolutely. I think I'll build on that and say that it shouldn't really be a question in terms of, you never really question whether your car is going to leak when you're driving it in the rain. So we should never really expect our houses to be leaking as well. I think In terms of how do we deliver better quality consistently, I think we need to look at a number of things in terms of how do we actually deliver homes in terms of using more innovative methodologies in terms of design for manufacture and assembly, looking at off-site construction methods whereby the quality of those products that makes the homes in terms of components have been well and truly tested. They've been prototyped. They've gone through a very rigorous process of making sure they're actually going to perform as designed. But we also need to look at procurement as well and think about the potential challenges and disadvantages of design and build, and looking at potentially whether we can find newer forms of procurement that incentivizes all parties in terms of the consultants, but also the client, but also the supply chains to actually work better together collaboratively to deliver better performing products. And then ultimately, I think in terms of sustainability, we need to look at really kind of making sure that homes that are being built, those who are delivering them are made to actually undertake robust post-occupancy evaluation to demonstrate that they are performing as designed, and if not, then some element of, I guess, limitation should be put on funding that maybe has been associated with the delivery of those homes. There needs to be some element of accountability, greater accountability, but I think post-occupancy evaluation should be brought to the fore to ensure that actually homes are being delivered to the standards which they initially received funding on.
You know, in the US, especially California, that's leading the way in terms of sustainability, carbon neutrality. There's been, you know, our building codes update every 3 years. And as our building code and energy code updates, it becomes more stringent. So if you're building anything, building a home that is 3 stories or less, you have to be net zero now, you're required. Obviously that adds cost, upfront cost in terms of your construction costs, but then your operating costs over time is lessened, so life cycle costs. So we have to change our thinking in terms of, you know, just looking at the upfront capital cost to build something and complaining about it's going to cost more and more and more, and then think about the life cycle cost. But it's a constant battle, right? It is a delicate balance of how much regulation do you push, because it is going to increase, you know, cost of housing. And we've seen the regulations over time continue to push the cost of housing because, you know, we want to make sure the buildings stand when there's an earthquake. You know, we deal with earthquakes here a lot, and every time there's a big earthquake, there's new information that we get, and the structural code changes, which may require additional structure, which then require additional cost. So we're constantly battling that. You know, how do we innovate? How do we try to build things, you know, build the same mousetrap better, faster, cheaper? And that's a constant, I think, challenge we have as architects to look at that. So right now we're looking at a lot of R&D because, you know, we build most of the buildings 7 stories or less, we build out of wood here, light wood construction. Lumber prices during COVID, you know, it was like toilet paper. You couldn't find it anywhere. Everybody was building something. There wasn't any supply. So we saw the escalation of wood prices go up 3 times, and it was just blowing all the deals up because people were, you know, developers were having to pay millions of dollars more for the same lumber as a year before. So out of that, we started looking, well, what can we offsite? What are the less cost commodities that we can build with? So we started looking at steel modular. We're investigating insulated concrete form to build the same type of projects. Steel moment frame systems in the low rise. We're looking at all different options to see if there's a cost benefit and a quality benefit. And I think when there is pressure in the market, innovation happens because we have to innovate. Either that or we can't produce at all, right? So I think this right now is a good opportunity. This COVID has pushed us to look at things in a different way. And I think that's, that's one of the things that we continue to do as architects.
Yeah, I may contribute to this. In Brazil, 10 years ago, we have a social a housing program called, as in a free translation, My House, My Life. Of course, they have a lot of problem. They are better than the houses that we see at the slums or at the favelas, of course. But these houses in this program, My House, My Life, were built, the majority of them, far from downtowns, for instance, far from green areas that cause a lot of problem of mobility and transportation, and a lot of problems with comfort, with in a not a very good environment. So we have a lot of problems also for the poor people that receive those houses to maintain it, to keep it, to conserve these houses, because they don't have income to keep these houses as it was built. So we have a lot of steps to do to reach your problems in case of quality, and we must have to balance, yes, quantity and quality, but it is a very, very big issue for us in Brazil.
Thanks, Renato. Jerry, is there anything you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people have referred to regulatory issues as well. I mean, the thing is, that as a profession, we don't have options except but to do things right, because we are controlled by legislative powers that actually say, buildings have to perform in a certain way in terms of heat or in terms of ventilation or in terms of structure. And I think the challenge that we face is how can, as the other speakers have said, how can we respond to that requirement, that obligation, that duty, as Lena Bobardi said, how can we respond to that in an innovative way? And I think we've got to, like the comment that was made by your colleagues from the States there, timber prices have rocketed. Projects are being cancelled or put on hold because of material going up. So part of our issue all the time is to see, are there ways we can use things more kind of economically without actually sacrificing quality? And I think that's something that deserves a lot of thought and research. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. So as you mentioned, some regulations there, I think that's going to lead me into my next question for Lanray. Lanray, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. How can the supply of social housing in the UK be maintained with the right to buy still in place? And is there anything that local authorities can do to help mitigate this?
Good questions. I guess for those who aren't necessarily aware of the right to buy scheme in England, this really kind of applies whereby those who are living in social housing have been living there for quite some time and have the opportunity to buy their property at discount from their respective local authority. That provides obviously opportunities for those who want to, but also challenges in terms of supply of social housing available in the market for those who need it. So I think currently right now we have probably 1.2 million or so people in the UK on the waiting list for social housing. So the need and demand is very much there. In terms of what local authorities can do to respond to that, I think there obviously needs to be assistance from government in terms of funding. So we have talked about the Ministry of Housing providing a good sum in its next investment cycle in terms of the next 5 years and providing 8.8 billion or so across Homes England and the GLA in terms of the Greater London Authority. there needs to be more promotion of different delivery vehicles for social housing and affordable housing, so that that balance can be achieved and struck. And there are a number of schemes and initiatives kind of being brought forward to enable that to come. The use of co-housing developments, community land trusts, but also the funding of innovative delivery mechanisms and funding and supporting local authorities and their partners to bring forward greater volumes of housing is very much underway. So the right to buy seems to be in some ways not necessarily here to stay, but it hasn't gone since it was introduced, or I think it was quite some time ago now. But it's something the councils will have to, I guess, just get a balance with, finding innovative ways to offset the balance of homes that are being acquired through right to buy.
Thanks, Lanray. And perhaps while we're still talking about some unique context to our local environments, Simon, I'm going to ask a question of you. You and I both know that single-family housing is deeply embedded in the American ideal, and I think that's especially true in Southern California. How do you overcome any apprehension to some of these solutions with both clients or policymakers or developers?
It's a really interesting question, right? There is this image of car culture, single family, and post-World War II neighborhoods where everybody had their own house with a backyard and the front yard driveway. And that paradigm has been shifting, but there's, like you say, the people who have it, they want to keep it that way. They don't want to see more traffic. They don't want to see more people. So in California, out of 50 states, we're 49th in housing production per capita. And that has a lot to do with a system that we have set up here that really makes it difficult to build. And one of the main issues is our California Environmental Qualities Act, which gets used as a vehicle to sue projects in the neighborhood. So it becomes a lengthy process and it becomes very difficult. At the local level, local politicians are beholden to the voters who and the single family owners tend to be the most vocal, and they want to keep the status quo and keep people out. But at the state level, understanding that we're over 3 million housing units short has been pushing down quite hard to create policies to produce housing. So you guys may have heard of the governor recall that we had. We have a very strange referendum system in California. He was not recalled, and as soon as he was his job was secure, he signed 2 housing bills, one of which basically abolishes single-family zones in California, and it allows single-family lots now to be split into 2 separate lots, and then you can build 2 houses on each lot. So that's a state-level policy that just got enacted. We'll see how it's going to get implemented with all the local resistance to the top-down policy. We've had other top-down policies come down. ADU, accessory dwelling unit, is a good one. Basically, state said, local, you cannot resist or you cannot deny people from having accessory dwelling units, but the local community and the municipality figures out how to make it difficult to build those. So we haven't seen a lot of the ADUs roll out. And that was another vehicle to produce more housing in California. But unfortunately, that's always the push, top down and then resistance from the local.
Great, thanks for that insight, Simon. We received a question from one of our panelists from yesterday's event, so I'd like to share that with you all and see if you have any thoughts. Do you have any project or idea to contribute to affordable housing issues in developing countries, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa?
Good question from Sakata yesterday. Yeah, that's a very interesting one and an area of obviously great potential. I think with my kind of I guess way forward hat on, there's definitely a gender balance that needs to be kind of brought forward in terms of the shaping of communities in the sub-Saharan continent, whereby I guess historic kind of maybe cultural kind of norms and I guess behaviours maybe still lend themselves towards more male-dominated industries when it comes to decision making in development, but also in construction and all the other kind of related kind of industries around real estate development. I think there needs to be a greater priority, an imperative placed on women contributing more to developing places and shaping decisions around how do you bring forward community development and housing to make it more equitable, but also to make it fairer and deliver genuinely great places and great communities and great housing. So I think that's probably one of the greater things, but I also think there needs to be a real appreciation of the vast abundance of natural resources that are available on the continent and how that can be used economically to deliver what is, probably in my view, unquestioned, that there is more than sufficient resource to deliver the volume of housing needed and more than sufficient human capital as well. It's probably about putting that to good economical use, but doing it in a sustainable fashion whereby there is a significant amount of abundance of resource to do so. So there's quite a number of things there that I said, but I think there's definitely solutions to enable good quality affordable housing to come forward in the sub-Saharan continent.
Our remaining question from the audience, does the panel think that there are solutions to providing affordable housing for those in need of it?
I think
yes.
everybody needs, yes, everybody needs affordable housing.
Yeah.
Affordable for whom? Affordable for the provider, affordable for the tenant, affordable for the purchaser. You know, there's so many, it's like a huge matrix of everybody needs affordable housing now. Have protest marches instead of other protest marches. You know, it's just, but it's, I mean, the thing, housing, I don't believe can ever be affordable until such time as land values are addressed. Land is the big issue. That if you have the cost of land, which is constantly escalating and constantly, you know, becoming less and less possible to buy, and so much land hoarding, unless you can actually factor some way of making that the cost of that land less, than the idea of putting affordable housing on it is going to be really a very difficult challenge. So yes for affordable land and yes for affordable housing, please.
Jerry, you're absolutely correct. You know, the first thing my professor for the housing delivery systems in the US said was, why do we need subsidy for housing? Because housing is expensive, right? Unless you know, you're in an area where you can do self-housing, which you know, half the housing production in the world is done through self-housing, self-built housing, and average price is $5,000. And there are lots of housing being built that way. But that's not an area of expertise of mine. I'm in an area where land prices are ridiculous and housing cost of housing is incredibly high. But I was at the World Urban Forum 2 years ago, and one of the representatives from France was talking about how much money they spend on social housing is 3% of GDP. In the US, if we had 3% of GDP, that went to social housing. I mean, I think it was something like $600 billion that would be funded to produce housing, to provide more affordable housing, provide more supply into the housing market, and that helps the overall pricing. So yes, I think there is a solution. It's just a matter of, can we get the consensus to get there, because it is going to cost a lot of money to produce the housing.
Yeah, but that's almost like the argument for, can we get consensus on climate change? You know, I mean, like, I don't see much of that internationally as well. And at the moment, when you begin to look at the ownership pattern of, let's say, cities like London in terms of new housing developments, and the place is full of unoccupied dwellings that are actually sitting there as investments only. So you get the complete commodification of housing as an issue, and so it moves way beyond the idea of housing as home, and it moves purely into the realm of housing as a generator of profit or a generator of investment, market-led, market-driven, market-enhanced. And you know, that is the antithesis of any system that would work in relation to how affordability should work. I mean, if affordability was to work, there should be land provided, there should be ways in which building costs are subsidized, and it should be actually related to ownership in a way that limits the right for speculation. So, you know, that's our big challenge, sir.
Yeah,
The world's big challenge.
We in the U.S. Talk about, is housing a right of an individual? In many of the socialist countries, it is an inherent right of a citizen to have housing. In the U.S., it is not. Right? Housing is not a right of any individual. It's not in the Constitution. It's not anywhere. So housing is something that you earn as a dream, the American dream. Right? You work hard, but because of that attitude, even at the Habitat 3, when we had the UN Habitat 3, U.S. actually made a revision to the New Urban Agenda to say, you know, we wouldn't agree to housing as a basic human right. So we need to change that mindset, right? When I say consensus, you know, is housing a right of everyone? Does everyone deserve a adequate housing within this country? I would say yes, but many of the taxpayers will say no, right? So that's where we're trying to find the balance of, well, you know, right now homelessness is so bad that it's the #1 issue for everybody living in Southern California. And as a result of that, money's being pumped in because, you know, we're looking at the government going, when are you going to solve our problems? So they appropriate more funds. There's more voter initiated, you know, funding and bonds and that are going to produce more housing. But unfortunately, it has to get to the point where we have, you know, we have about 125,000 homeless people living in California. Majority of them are in LA County. We have close to about 70,000 homeless people in Orange County. It's visible everywhere. It is not, you cannot go anywhere without seeing a tent, without seeing, you know, accumulated stuff on, you know, in our public right of way. In certain areas, you can't even walk down the street or walk down the sidewalk because there's so much concentration of homelessness. It shouldn't be like this, right? So it's a frustrating issue that we are facing because, you know, like you're saying, Jerry, it has become a commodity, right? It has become a product where it has become a vehicle of investment, and we need to figure out how to reverse that so that, you know, there's no hoarding or there's no, you know, one person owning 20 homes and 20 people having no homes.
Yeah.
Being cognizant of the time, we have a remaining 5 minutes here, so I just want to ask if the four of you want to give your final thoughts. So maybe take 30 seconds to say some last words, and we'll wrap today's session.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes. I have some thoughts about that. House is a very expensive commodity, and it's an investment here, also here in Brazil. Few people has its own house. They live in renting houses. Few people has its own. They rent, and they skipping all its life, changing their homes because they don't own a home, they only rent. So it's a very, very, very big problem for us. And I'd like to thank the invitation, and sorry for any problem I caused in that. It was very, very good session.
Yeah.
I don't think you caused any problems.
No.
It was
No, because of my presentation.
blame it on technology, right?
It was worth waiting for.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I echo the sentiments. You know, I think one thing that one takeaway that I have here is this isn't just a local issue, right? We're experiencing housing problems everywhere, and it's a common problem. And I think just being able to talk about it and see it from a different perspective for the same problem that we have, it's really great to hear, and to be able to expand my kind of geography to as a world problem, not as a Los Angeles local problem. So really appreciate the invitation and the conversation.
But you know what I fear at the moment, listening to everybody, is that affordability by its nature is impossible under the current system. And how does that actually get altered, or not so much radicalized, by some way of having, like the way that community land trusts work, or the way that that HUD many years ago actually set up revolving funds for housing, or for revolving funds to purchase sites and have land that actually was not adding to the capital cost. Because if you take the cost of land out of it, you're going to be reducing the cost of a dwelling by about 15% on average. And that is a huge issue. And then after that, if there's a way in which construction can be, in some ways assisted, through interventions, through grants, through supports, through kind of low-rise loans, through long-term interest-free loans, etc., then we will begin to see a way in which both the provision of land and the construction of a dwelling could be addressed in a way that actually became reasonable. At the moment, where's the reason?
I'll just add to that as well. Yeah, I think everything that's been said is pretty applicable here in the UK as well, and no place more so than maybe London, where, yeah, the commodification of housing has just been significant over the last probably 25 to 30 years. But yeah, the delivery of better, more affordable housing is a social and economic imperative that we just can't ignore. I mean, across the UK, we've got 200,000 people homeless, which is obviously nowhere near the number that Simon's talking about in terms of, collectively maybe in the United States, but it's still a significant number. And like I said before, there's over 1 million people waiting on the social kind of housing register, if we call it that. But I think, yeah, we've got to address land values, and again, we see it so much in London, whereby, yeah, affordability is largely based on the fact that land values are just ridiculously high in a city like London, but we do see that increasingly in other major cities in the UK, whereby the London effect is spreading out and really making property an asset class that everybody wants to kind of hoard, and you often end up now with people working up into their mid-30s to late 40s, still struggling to get onto the housing ladder, and that has, like I said, generational impacts in terms of people growing up in overcrowded conditions, and then potentially those living in housing that is not being maintained and repaired and retrofitted and being brought up to standards to ensure that people can live the very best lives to the best standards and best accommodation of that time. Yeah, so it's an issue that needs to be addressed very urgently.
Well, thank you all. It has been truly a pleasure chairing today's very inspiring session. You've shared a lot of ideas, and I think you've given all of us a lot to think about. So I want to thank all of you again for taking time out of your schedules to join us. Professor Renato da Gama Rosa Costa from the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation in Brazil, Simon Ha, of Steinberg Hart in the USA, Jerry Cahill and CMQ Architecture and Sketch Architects in Ireland, and Lanray Bolade of Bolade Design Studio in the UK. I'd also like to once again thank the Australian Institute of Architects, the Architectural Society of China, the Royal Institute of Dutch Architects, the Council of Architecture and Urbanism in Brazil, the Japan Institute of Architects, the Korean Institute of Architects, the New Zealand Institute of Architects, and the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland for their support and contribution, and especially the Royal Institute of British Architects, who have done tremendous work putting together this series. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working and collaborating with all these institutes. Without their support, we would not be here today, so huge thanks to everyone. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining and contributing and providing your questions. I hope you all enjoyed this session. For now, a huge thanks to all our speakers and today's worldwide audience for watching. I wish you all a very good day or a good evening wherever you are in the world. And until we see you next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.